I should have quit the moment I saw the rulebook. I should have taken one look at its grease-stained pages. The way the ink bled like something wet had been spilled on it, something thicker than water, and I should have walked right back out the door. But I didn't, because I was broke, because I needed this job, and because, at the time, I still believed the worst thing that could happen to me in a McDonald's was getting stuck on fry duty during a lunch rush. I was wrong. Before we dive into the eerie secrets behind these strange McDonald's rules, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like the video. Get ready. This is one story you won't want to miss. I'm not proud of where I am in life. I dropped out of college a year ago, spent too much time partying, not enough time studying, and before I knew it, I was drowning in student loans with no degree to show for it. My parents weren't the kind to give second chances, so I ended up couch surfing between friends' apartments until even they got tired of me. Now I live in a cramped studio apartment that smells like mildew, with a busted heater and a landlord who only answers my calls if I threaten legal action. I eat ramen 5 nights a week, my car barely runs, and if I don't pay rent by Friday, I'll be sleeping on the streets. So when I saw the ad for a night shift crew member at the local McDonald's, $16 an hour, no experience required, I jumped at the chance. It was just a fast food job. Just flipping burgers, mopping floors, dealing with drunk customers at 2 a.m. At least that's what I thought. The interview was quick. Too quick. The manager, Mr. Langley, barely looked at my resume before shoving a contract at me and telling me to sign. He was a tall, gaunt man with sunken cheeks and a permanent look of exhaustion, like he hadn't slept in years. His uniform was too clean, pressed and spotless, like he was trying too hard to look normal. "Read the rule book before your shift tonight," he said, sliding a battered booklet across the desk. "Memorize it. Some rules are non-negotiable." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I should have quit right then. I should have walked out before I ever put on that stupid visor and grease-stained apron. But I needed the money. So I took the rulebook home. And that's when the real nightmare began. The booklet was old, worn down, with curled edges and pages that had gone yellow with time. Some rules were normal, expected even. Rule number 1, always wash your hands before handling food. Rule 2, customers are our priority. Be polite and professional. But the further I read, the stranger they became. Rule number 6, if a customer orders a number 9 after midnight, do not make eye contact. Take the payment, nod, and hand them an empty bag. Rule number 13, if you hear knocking from inside the walk-in freezer, do not open the door. No one is inside. Rule number 21, if the drive-through intercom crackles with static but no car is there, shut your eyes and count to 10 before speaking again. I read the rules over and over, waiting for the punchline. Maybe this was some kind of initiation prank? A way to mess with the new guy? But then I saw rule number 30. Rule 30, under no circumstances should you ever enter the play place after dark. I frowned. The play place had been removed years ago, at least that's what I thought. The McDonald's in my town was one of those older locations built in the late 90s, and I could still remember playing in the tunnels when I was a kid. But they had torn it down ages ago. Hadn't they? A pit formed in my stomach. This wasn't funny anymore. I considered calling Mr. Langley, asking him if this was some kind of joke. But something told me I wouldn't like the answer. So I tossed the rulebook onto my kitchen counter, shook off the unease creeping up my spine, and told myself it was just a dumb prank. That night, I showed up for my first shift, and the first thing I saw was the play place. It was still there. I stood in the parking lot, staring through the glass, my breath fogging up the window. The same towering plastic tubes, the same red and yellow slide twisting down into the ball pit. The same tunnels where, as a kid, I used to crawl through, laughing and screaming as I played tag with my friends. But it looked wrong. The colors were faded, The plastic was dull, covered in grime, and the worst part, the entrance was blocked off. A row of metal chairs had been stacked against the opening, as if someone had tried to seal it shut. A handwritten sign was taped to the glass, closed for maintenance. I felt sick. Something wasn't right. A voice snapped me out of my thoughts. "Hey newbie, you coming in or what?" I turned. A girl about my age was leaning against the doorway, arms crossed. She had dark circles under her eyes, her uniform wrinkled like she hadn't bothered to iron it. A cigarette dangled from her lips, smoked. Half-hooked. "Name's Lisa," she said, exhaling a puff of smoke. "You're Jake, right? Langley said we got fresh meat tonight." Slowly, still shaken. Lisa smirked. "Let me guess, you read the rule book?" My mouth felt dry. "Yeah." "Freaky, huh?" She took another drag, eyes flicking toward the play place. "Don't think about it too much. Just follow the rules, keep your head down, and don't ask questions. You'll last longer that way." Before I could respond, the door swung open, and Mr. Langley stepped outside. His expression was unreadable. "Jake," he said flatly, "time to clock in." I hesitated. I wanted to leave. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get in my car and drive. But then I thought about my empty bank account, my overdue rent, the fact that I had nowhere else to go. So I swallowed my fear, and I stepped inside. The smell of fryer grease and artificial beef filled my nostrils. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright, too harsh. The kitchen was eerily clean, the stainless steel counters gleaming under the yellow glow. "Lockers in the back," Langley muttered, handing me a name tag. "Read the rules?" "Yeah." He held my gaze for a moment. Then he smiled. It was the first time I'd seen him smile, and I wish I never had. His teeth were too white, too perfect, like he had never used them at all. "Good," he said. Then he handed me a greasy paper bag. "First order's up. Make sure you follow Rule 6. I looked at the receipt. The total was $6.66, and the order was a number 9. Outside, a car idled in the drive-thru. I couldn't see the driver. Just a dark silhouette behind the wheel, completely still, waiting. Lisa nudged my shoulder. "Go on," she whispered. "Don't make eye contact." I stepped toward the window, hands trembling. The hairs on the back of my neck rose as I slid the bag across the counter. The figure inside the car didn't move. Then slowly, it reached out. And as its fingers brushed against mine, I realized something was horribly, horribly wrong. Its skin was ice cold and wet, like something that had been rotting in water. The bag vanished into the darkness of the car. Then the window rolled up, and the car drove away. Lisa exhaled sharply. "Congrats, newbie." I turned to her, my stomach churning. What the hell was that? She didn't answer. She just pointed at the rulebook, sitting on the counter. I looked down, and a new rule had appeared. Rule number 42. Once you've seen them, they've seen you too. There are things worse than ghosts. Ghosts don't watch you. Ghosts don't wait for you. Ghosts don't whisper your name when you're alone in the dark. But he does. And I made the mistake of looking at him. I barely made it through my first shift. After that thing in the drive-thru, after feeling its wet, rotting skin brush against my hand, I spent the rest of the night in survival mode. I didn't ask questions. I didn't look too long at anything. I just followed orders, wiped down counters, flipped burgers, and pretended that nothing was wrong. Lisa kept an eye on me, watching for any signs that I might crack. I don't think she wanted to be the one to explain the reality of this place to me. Maybe she thought if she didn't say it out loud, it wouldn't be real. But it was real. And it was getting worse. The second night, I arrived at work exhausted. I barely slept after my first shift. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure in the car. Saw its fingers reaching for me. Saw its fingers reaching for me. Heard the wet, slithering sound as it pulled the bag into the darkness. But I couldn't afford to miss a shift. So I forced myself through the doors, put on my grease-stained uniform, and did what I had to do. For the first few hours, nothing happened. I let myself believe that maybe last night had been a fluke. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe sleep deprivation was screwing with my head. And then at 2:37 a.m., the laughter started. I was refilling the napkin dispensers when I heard it. Faint, distant, a child's laughter. It echoed through the restaurant, high-pitched and sharp, like the sound of a rusty swing set creaking in the wind. My stomach turned to ice. Slowly, I lifted my head. The play place. It stood at the far end of the restaurant, bathed in the sickly glow of the overhead fluorescents. The same metal chairs were still stacked against the entrance. The same handwritten sign still taped to the glass, closed for maintenance. But the laughter was coming from inside. I swallowed hard. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wasn't imagining it. I could hear the faint scuffle of movement. The soft thud of plastic as something crawled through the tunnels. Something was in there. Something that wasn't supposed to be. A new rule from the book flashed in my mind. Rule number 31, if you hear laughter coming from the play place, do not look inside the tunnels. I gripped the counter. My fingers dug into the cold, sticky surface. Don't look. Don't look. But I did. I don't know what I expected to see. A stray kid? A prank? A radio left on by accident? I would have given anything for it to be one of those things, but it wasn't. It was him. Wedged deep within the tunnels, half hidden in shadow. He was too big to be inside there. A man, fully grown, his limbs twisted and contorted to fit the narrow plastic tubes. His face was pale, gaunt, stretched over sharp cheekbones like his skin had been pulled too tight. His eyes were too large, too round, and they stared at me without blinking. Then he smiled. His teeth were wrong. Too many. Too sharp. I staggered backward, knocking over a stack of trays. The sound shattered the silence, and then, slowly, too slowly, he began to move. His limbs bent in ways they shouldn't. His body twisted, shifting with jerky, unnatural movements. I watched, frozen, as he started crawling toward me. He never broke eye contact. His grin never faltered. And then, the laughter stopped. A silence thicker than death filled the restaurant. And in that silence, he whispered my name. Jake. I ran. Didn't think, didn't look back. Just ran. I sprinted to the kitchen, nearly crashing into Lisa. She grabbed my shoulders. What the hell is wrong with you? I couldn't breathe. Couldn't speak. I just pointed toward the play place, gasping for air. Lisa's face went pale. You looked, didn't you? I nodded. She let out a slow breath. Shit. Lisa. My voice was barely a whisper. What is that? She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed my arm and dragged me into the storage room. The moment the door shut, she spun toward me, eyes burning with something between anger and fear. You don't break the rules, she hissed. I told you not to look. I didn't mean to, I stammered. Lisa pressed her fingers to her temples, muttering under her breath. Then, after a long pause, she sighed. Okay. She turned, rummaging through a box on the shelf. Newbie mistake, she muttered. Happens sometimes. My hands were still shaking. Lisa, tell me what's going on. She found what she was looking for, a roll of duct tape. She tore off a strip, grabbed a marker, and wrote something on it. Then she slapped it onto my name tag. I looked down. James. Lisa met my eyes. If he calls for you again, she said, that's not your name. I didn't sleep that night. When my shift ended, I went home, locked the door, and sat on my couch in silence. My heart was still racing. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. His face, his teeth. The way he moved, and worse, the way he had said my name. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my crumpled name tag. The duct tape was still there, still fresh. James. I swallowed hard. Somewhere deep inside the tunnels of the play place, he was still waiting, still watching. And next time? I wasn't sure a fake name would be enough. Some things follow you home. They slip through the cracks of reality, between the spaces where rules are broken and names are spoken. I learned that too late. Because when I woke up that night, heart pounding, throat dry, I wasn't alone. Something was in my room. And it was whispering my name. The voice crawled through the darkness, slithering into my ears like a breath against my skin. Jake. I shot upright in bed, my body drenched in sweat. The room was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that feels wrong, like the world is holding its breath. I turned on my bedside lamp with shaking fingers. Light flooded the room. Empty. Nothing was there, but I could still feel it. Watching. Waiting. I grabbed the name tag from my nightstand, the one Lisa had altered. The one that now read, James. I clutched it like a lifeline. The rule was clear. If he calls for you, that's not your name. I forced myself to breathe. Slow. Even. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But then, Jake. The voice came again, and this time it was closer. Right outside my bedroom door. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. The door creaked. A shadow stretched across the floor, long and spindly, its fingers twitching. And then, knock, knock, gentle, slow, a rhythm almost playful. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. Jake, not my name, not my name, not my... The knob twisted. I lunged forward, throwing my weight against the door, locking it in place. Silence, then a chuckle. Low, amused. You looked? A breath of air slipped through the crack beneath the door, thick and cold, like the scent of something old and rotting. The shadow shifted, then it was gone. And I stayed awake until morning. I should have quit. I should have packed a bag, left town, never looked back. But I didn't. Because when my phone buzzed at noon with a message from Lisa, "Get to work early, we need to talk," I knew I couldn't just walk away. Not yet. Not while I still had questions. Lisa was waiting for me when I arrived. She wasn't in uniform. She wasn't even inside the building. She was standing in the parking lot, arms crossed, face pale. "Tell me exactly what happened last night." I told her everything. The whisper, the knocking, the shadow beneath my door. Lisa listened, her expression unreadable. Then she muttered a curse under her breath. "You answered him, didn't you?" I frowned. "What?" "You reacted when he called your name." She shook her head. "That's enough. That's all he needs." I swallowed hard. "What is he?" Lisa exhaled, looked toward the play place. Then finally, "He used to be an employee. His name was Darren. Worked the night shift. Same as me. One night, he broke a rule. Lisa never told me which one. Just that after that night, he wasn't Darren anymore. He was something else. Something that still crawled through the tunnels. Something that still laughed when the restaurant was empty." "He's been waiting," Lisa whispered. "Waiting for someone to notice him. Waiting for someone to look." A chill ran down my spine. "He knows your name now, Jake, and he wants you to come back." I clenched my fists. "Then I won't go near the play place." Lisa didn't smile, didn't laugh, just shook her head. "You don't get it," she said. Then she leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've already started playing his game. That night, I almost didn't show up. Almost. But something pulled me back. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was the sickening need for answers, or maybe it was the whisper I heard right as I stepped through the doors. Jake. Waiting for me. Calling me back." The play place loomed at the far end of the restaurant, dimly lit, half in shadow. The chairs were still stacked against the entrance. The "closed for maintenance" sign was still there. But the tunnels weren't empty. He was in there. Waiting. I could hear the soft thud of movement, the quiet click of nails against plastic, a slow, deliberate sound. I turned to Lisa. "What happens if I go in?" Lisa's face darkened. "You don't want to know." But I did, and so did he. Because when I took a step forward, the laughter began again. Soft, echoing, welcoming. Lisa grabbed my arm. "Don't." But it was too late. I stepped past the chairs and crawled inside. The tunnels were tight, claustrophobic. The air was damp, thick with the scent of old plastic and something rotting. The deeper I went, the wronger it felt. The space behind me stretched. The entrance was gone, like the tunnels were twisting, shifting, pulling me further in. And then, tap, tap, my breath caught. Something was up ahead. Something waiting for me. I turned a corner and saw him. Curled in the darkness, his body contorted, folded in ways that weren't human. His grin was wide, too wide. "Jake," he whispered. "Not my name. Not my name." I clutched the fake name tag. "James," I whispered. His grin faltered, and in that moment I moved. I didn't crawl, I threw myself backward, scrambling through the tunnels as fast as I could, ignoring the laughter, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the way the tunnels seemed to breathe. Then, light. I spilled out onto the floor, gasping for air. Lisa was there, so was the manager, both of them staring. "You're done," the manager said. His voice was flat. "Get out." Lisa didn't stop him. She just watched as I pulled myself to my feet, heart pounding, head spinning. And then, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear, "You should have never answered him." I didn't argue. I walked out. Didn't look back. Didn't even grab my last paycheck. But as I drove home that night, hands trembling against the wheel, I saw something in my rearview mirror. A shadow. A shape. Crawling through the back seat, and then, "Jake?" I didn't turn around. Didn't blink. Didn't answer. But I could still hear him laughing. Still hear him whispering. Still feel his eyes watching me. And I knew, deep in my bones, I'd never be free. If you made it this far, you're one of the brave ones. But tell me, would you have followed the rules, or would you have answered when he called your name? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the dark. Until next time, stay out of the play place.